Hi everybody, happy Friday. It's Insta Live on Fry. It is Audrey Button, Safe Harbors of the Finger Lakes College Specialist. I use the pronoun she, her, hers. And it is May. We ended last month with the discussion on forensic rape exams with our guest, or I should say guest, if you didn't watch it last week. It is available on YouTube and on our Instagram page. So if you remember, last month was Sexual Assault Awareness Month and also Child Abuse Prevention Month. So this month I created some topics mostly around Mental Health Awareness Month, which is this month in May, and also it's National Foster Care Month, and it's also Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So if you've noticed our schedule for the month of May, all of our topics are revolving around those three things. So for today, we're going to be talking about violence and the long-term effects on survivors. So a lot of it's going to be mental health related. And I know I've kind of talked about what we'll be talking about today before with our trauma-informed care video that was several months ago, but this will be a good refresher and just a reminder about how trauma affects people and also affects people in different ways. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I always like to give a content warning because some of the material I'll be discussing may be sensitive to some. So please take care of yourself however you need to. And this video is recorded, so it will be available afterwards if you are not able to watch it at this, moment, which clearly you'll be watching it later if you're not watching it now. So it is available on YouTube and our Instagram page as well. And also a reminder, we are on TikTok. We have not made TikTok videos yet, but we are on there, so definitely check it out, okay? And with that, I just always like to give a disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this video are not necessarily those of Safe Harbors of the Finger Lakes, but of those in the video. So, all right, so I want to kind of give a definition of trauma and what that is. And this definition is from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So, individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. I really like that definition because it encompasses that trauma is really complex in its own way. It's very individualized. It can affect different areas of our life, not just physical, but even that emotional part, your social well-being, your spiritual well-being. It is multifaceted in that sense. So it can affect us all in different ways. And keep in mind, trauma can come from a variety of things. So, I know we at Safe Harbors work with victims and survivors of child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. Those are all traumatic things, but, trauma can be experienced by being a victim or a witness in a war zone, experiencing school shootings or anything that is traumatic to that person, like even a car accident, anything that is traumatic to that person, that's where trauma can come from. So I talk about how trauma is individualized, and I always like to mention, it is not the event specifically that determines whether something is traumatic to someone, but their person's experience of that event. So this is why two people who get in a car accident might have two completely different responses. There's other factors that could be influencing that, like if they've already had a traumatic past history, so they might have been triggered by something in that car accident or anything like that. Or they just completely, experienced that event completely differently. I don't know what I'm saying right now, but they might have experienced the event differently than each other, even though they were possibly in the same situation. It's just depending on how their body responded to that traumatic event. So with that, you see oftentimes people who've experienced trauma don't always get traumatic symptoms like PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, or ASD, which is acute stress disorder, which I'll talk about in a second. So like I said, it depends on how they experience the event. So keep in mind, they might experience symptoms of ASD or PTSD. So with acute stress disorder or ASD, this generally persists, a couple of days after the event, but doesn't usually last longer than a month, because after a month it is usually defined as PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So not everyone's gonna experience those things, even though you're like, wow, that does seem really traumatic. They might have not reacted in that way, or they did. Like I said, it's just very individual, and I'll talk about how to kind of navigate that if you're around people or there's people in your life that have a potentially traumatic history, which is a part of that trauma-informed care that we've discussed before. So, like I said, not all those who've experienced trauma have experienced ASD or PTSD, and those who experience ASD or PTSD might have completely different experiences with those things as well. It's just not like a one-size-fits-all. They might recover from it at a different rate, or they might not recover from it at all, or you know what I mean? There's just so much, there's so many different variables, so we'll talk about that in a second too. So with someone who's experienced trauma and it has impacted them in a way, like if they were experiencing ASD or PTSD, you might see them dealing with, or you might be experiencing feelings of guilt, shame, self-blame, embarrassment, fear or distrust, sadness or anger. They might feel really vulnerable. They might be isolated or lonely. They might feel like they have kind of a lack of control, because oftentimes that control is taken from them in that sense. Maybe some sort of numbness, confusion, shock or disbelief, denial, and so forth. And then you may see or experience yourself depression, anxiety, dissociation, maybe some flashbacks or nightmares, irritability, outbursts of anger, suicidal thoughts, difficulty concentrating, sleeping problems, avoidance behavior. So avoidance behavior is like something that reminds you of that traumatic event of any way. It doesn't have to be the exact same event. It could be something that you smell, something like a color you see, something that just reminds you of that event. It doesn't have to necessarily be like something exactly like that event. It could just even be something as simple as a color that could, or a word, or a sound of someone's voice, or anything like that could trigger a traumatic response. So they might show avoidance behavior to things that remind them of the event, or the traumatic events, I should say. So this can eventually lead to chronic health issues long-term because of this constant fight or flight response, which I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but maybe we can do an Instagram live on it sometime, on the chronic health issues that develop from the long-term fight or flight response. So that can lead to those chronic health issues like diabetes, I can't even speak today, and chronic heart issues, anything like that, which can obviously in the long run impact someone's health. So thankfully, people are resilient, they can bounce back, they can get on that path to healing. And what you can do to help people who've possibly experienced trauma, it's just safe to assume everyone you've come across has probably experienced trauma at some point in their life. Encouraging and building those support systems, because oftentimes they might not have good support systems. Avoiding victim blaming, which I know we've talked about before. Just be conscious of the words you use, how you act, especially like you might not realize someone you're friends with or in your life is a victim or survivor. So just being aware of that and just avoiding those victim blaming behaviors or words. Connect to resources, know the resources around you, mental health resources, domestic violence resources, any sort of medical resources that they might need. Know the resources around you so you can hopefully help. If you don't know how to help, you at least know where to point them. And then, discover those healthy coping skills, because a lot of times people with trauma use quick fixes to stress. So like alcohol, drugs, unsafe sex, anything like that. So figuring out those healthy coping mechanisms is going to be really great. So, instead of all those things, you're encouraging them to exercise or do yoga or do meditation or mindfulness activities of any sort. So keep that in mind as well. And then lastly, just being empathetic. And I know we've talked about empathy before, but just be a good human being. Just let them speak, because they might just want you to listen to them. Just let them know that you're there in any way that you can help. And if you don't know how to help, like I said, helping them find someone who can. So, just being aware of how much trauma can change somebody in the long term is really important. And we'll talk about more about how trauma affects the brain specifically next week. So make sure you tune in next week for that. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.